Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that your family home, like the place you've lived your whole life, has been legally handed over to heavily armed strangers.
Right. Just overnight.
Literally overnight. They move into your living room, they change the locks, and they casually inform you that speaking your own language under your own roof is now considered a crime.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense.
Right. Everything that anchored you to your life, your culture, your daily routines, your sense of safety is just wiped away, replaced by the rigid, sterile mandates of a foreign military power.
Completely upended.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you were a teenager in that situation, watching the adults around you suddenly powerless, how would you react? Would you just keep your head down and hope to survive, or would you find some way, anyway, really, to fight back?
It is a profoundly disorienting scenario to put yourself in, but it's the exact unvarnished reality that a very specific group of people woke up to. Because, when we study resistance movements, we're usually conditioned to look for organized armies, right? Or covert intelligence agencies, well-funded political groups.
The professionals.
Exactly. We rarely look at the local high school.
Which is exactly why we are pulling this specific thread today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
And to be here.
Our source material today is a fascinating Wikipedia article detailing the history of something called the Vassal-Lupu High School Group. And just to set a quick baseline for you listening right now, our mission for this deep dive is to explore the historical facts of a sudden military occupation in 1940. We're going to map out the timeline of how a small band of ordinary teenagers and their teachers decided to take on a global superpower.
Right.
And I want to be really clear here. We are impartially reporting the historical facts from the source material regarding the Soviet occupation and the group's anti-Soviet goals.
Purely as historical events.
Exactly. Exactly as the records show them. We aren't here to take political sides, and we definitely aren't endorsing any specific viewpoints. We are merely conveying the historical record provided to us.
Which is so important to establish up front.
Yeah, just to understand the sheer audacity of this group's defiance and, well, the ultimate heavy cost of their actions.
Having that objective foundation is critical. Because to truly grasp the gravity of what these high schoolers did, you have to look impartially at the sheer overwhelming scale of the machine they were throwing themselves against.
Okay, let's unpack this because the timeline here is what immediately grabbed my attention.
The speed of it?
The sheer speed of this historical shift is terrifying. So the text starts on June 28, 1940. That's when the Soviet Union occupies Bessarabia.
Right.
Now, just to anchor you geographically, Bessarabia is a region in Eastern Europe that found itself utterly caught in the geopolitical crossfire of the Second World War.
A very volatile area at that time.
Exactly. So the occupation happens, and almost immediately, the local high school in the town of Orhei, the Vassal-Lupu High School, is stripped of its identity.
Just completely erased.
Yeah. The new authorities mandate that it will no longer carry that name. It is renamed simply and coldly as a pedagogical school.
What's fascinating here is the unseen psychological impact of that single, seemingly minor bureaucratic decision.
Because it just sounds like paperwork, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
To an occupying military force, changing a name on a building is just standard administrative procedure. You standardize the territory.
Wow.
But you have to think about the mechanism of cultural erasure here.
Totally.
Teenagers, in particular, are acutely and deeply sensitive to their own identity. I mean, their school isn't just a building, it's their social universe.
It's everything to them.
Right. To the students walking those halls, taking down the name Vassal-Lupu wasn't just a sign replacement. It was a daily, highly visible structural reminder that their culture was being overwritten.
Yeah.
And that their past no longer mattered.
It is the ultimate flex of authoritarian power, I think. It is the occupier saying, we don't even need to use bullets to change who you are. We just need a memo and a screwdriver.
And that kind of aggressive overnight erasure creates an immense psychological pressure cooker.
Oh, absolutely.
You are taking adolescents who are already at an age defined by rebellion and identity formation, and you're subjecting them to a profound systemic humiliation.
And the timeline proves just how volatile that pressure cooker actually was. Barely a month passes.
Barely a month.
On August 1st, 1940, the resistance group is officially formed. The text explicitly notes that this group consists of about 32 members.
Not a massive army.
No. It's mostly students, alongside a few of their teachers. And their stated goals are incredibly ambitious, like They aim to overthrow Soviet power in Bessarabia and to reunite with the Kingdom of Romania.
Which is a massive goal for 32 people.
Right. But I have to stop and ask the obvious question here. Are we looking at a group of kids just venting their frustrations in a basement? Or is this an actual strategic resistance?
Well, the speed of it is the key indicator here. Forming a resistance group just over a month after a massive military occupation rolls through your town that shows an immediate, visceral rejection of the new reality.
So it's very reactionary.
Exactly. This was not a long-planned, deeply resourced political movement. They didn't have weapons caches,
Yeah.
They didn't have foreign intelligence agents training them in tradecraft. They had their shock, their profound anger at their erased identity, and their shared trust in one another.
But how does a band of 32 high school students and a few teachers actually fight an empire?
That is the big question.
Because you can't just declare you're going to overthrow a superpower without an armory.
Right.
So they start with the only weapons they actually have access to, words and the physical public spaces of their own town.
Right. They have to start small.
And they adopt an alias for the group. They call themselves Majada Honda.
Which remains one of the most striking, almost cinematic details in this entire historical record.
It is incredibly mysterious. The source material drops this moniker, Majada Honda, completely without explanation.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. It doesn't tell us what it means to them, where they heard it, or why they chose it.
Yeah.
It is just left there on the page like a fascinating artifact of their secrecy.
It really is.
But operating under this name, they get right to work. They begin spreading anti-Soviet manifestos and writing highly charged slogans on public walls all over Orhe.
And looking at the specific text of those slogans, I mean, you can feel the raw, unfiltered emotion of that specific moment in 1940.
You really can. Imagine walking down your local street, right? A street now patrolled by foreign soldiers, and seeing these phrases painted on the walls.
Just out in the open.
Yeah. Things like, death to the Stalinist occupiers.
Oh.
Or go home barbarians and down with the executioner Stalin. Oh, and don't believe the Bolshevik occupiers.
Those are not subtle.
No, they are objectively brave. But I want to challenge the actual impact of this for a second.
Sure.
I mean, it's teenagers writing graffiti in the middle of the night. Were they genuinely a threat to the Soviet regime? Or was the state just swatting at a minor annoyance?
This raises an important question about the actual mechanics of power.
Okay.
What is the single most vital asset for an occupying force? It isn't just their military might. It's not the number of tanks they have on the street.
What is it then?
It is the illusion of total, unquestionable control. In a newly occupied territory, controlling the public narrative is everything.
I see.
So the moment a citizen walks past a wall and sees a slogan calling the leader of a superpower an executioner, well, that illusion shatters.
Because it proves someone else is out there thinking the exact same thing you are.
Precisely. It proves to the local populace that the state is not omnipotent. It proves there are gaps in their surveillance.
Right, but they can't be everywhere at once.
Exactly. In a highly controlled, authoritarian environment, words aren't just vandalism. They are a direct existential threat to the state's authority because they break the monopoly on fear.
That makes a lot of sense.
If the state cannot even keep its own walls clean, how absolute is its power, really?
That is a great point. The graffiti acts as a very public crack in their authority. But anonymous slogans scribbled in the dark, however powerful, are still just words at the end of the day.
True.
It seems Mashada Honda realized that to truly challenge this empire, they needed something undeniable. A grand, deeply symbolic gesture to prove to the entire town that the resistance was real and capable of action.
They needed to level up.
And that realization leads directly to their most audacious and, frankly, their most dangerous operation.
They had to escalate from anonymous messaging to physical, undeniable action.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the timing and the execution of this are almost unbelievable.
It's wild.
It is Christmas night, 1940. Think about the bitter cold of an Eastern European winter in December, and think about the cultural significance of that specific night. The group executes what the text simply describes as an extraordinary achievement. Under the cover of darkness, they physically take down the Soviet red flags, and they raise Romanian flags right on top of heavily guarded, highly sensitive buildings in Orhe.
You cannot overstate the risk involved in the specific targets they chose for this.
Because they didn't just pick a random local post office or a park.
No.
They targeted City Hall.
Yep.
They targeted the Romanian Communist Party building. And incredibly, they targeted the headquarters of the NKVD.
The secret police.
Let's actually think about the mechanics of that. Sneaking out to pull a prank on a rival high school is one thing,
Sure.
but physically climbing onto the roof of the secret police headquarters, the very institution whose entire bureaucratic purpose is to hunt down, interrogate, and eliminate dissenters.
To swap out their flag.
Yes. The level of adrenaline, the agonizing tension of sneaking past armed guards in the dead of winter, it is an unfathomable level of risk for a group of teenagers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the profound, calculated psychological warfare embedded in this single act.
How so?
Doing this on Christmas night was not an accident. It is a culturally and spiritually significant time that the occupying state would have been heavily monitoring, right? Because they know local sentiments would be running high.
Oh, definitely. They'd be on high alert.
And doing it to the NKVD specifically.
Yeah, why the NKVD?
That was designed entirely to humiliate the occupiers. It was a brilliant, if incredibly dangerous calculation. It sent a massive, undeniable message to the local populace.
Which was?
The people who are supposed to be watching your every move couldn't even protect the roof over their own heads.
Oh, wow. That is powerful.
It was a staggering embarrassment for the regime. You can imagine the absolute panic and fury inside those buildings the next morning when they realized what had happened.
But that fury is exactly the problem. You cannot humiliate a superpower's secret police on their own headquarters without triggering a massive, brutal retaliation.
You can't.
The high of that Christmas morning flag swap leads directly to the crushing paranoia and tragedy of the new year. By January 1941, the NKVD manages to crack into the organization, and they arrest most of its members.
It happens so fast.
But I keep wondering, how? How does a secret police force actually crack a group of 32 high schoolers who have been operating in the shadows for months?
Well, while our source material doesn't give us the exact wiretap or the specific informant or the exact moment the secret slipped, we have to look at the ruthless mechanism of the NKVD itself.
Right.
You are dealing with an institution that has unlimited resources and zero constraints on its interrogation methods.
Zero.
When you put a team of elite, hardened adult interrogators up against kids who are terrified, likely isolated in holding cells and carrying a massive secret for the first time in their lives,
Yeah.
the mathematical odds of someone slipping up or breaking under pressure are near absolute certainty. The state apparatus is designed to crush human endurance.
And the sheer weight of that state apparatus is staggering. The text specifically lists the personnel involved in this investigation, and it reads like a bureaucratic tidal wave crashing down on a high school.
Yes, unbelievable.
The investigation is led by G. Goldberg, who is the chief of the Ojai County section of the NKVD. It is conducted by a chief investigator named Konopikin, his deputy Karebelo, and an entire squad of specialized investigators.
Entire squad.
Yeah. Sharapanov, Malinin, Morev, Nikitovich, Plotnikov, and Toporov.
Just listen to the sheer administrative bulk of that list. A massive team of specialized adult investigators marshaling all the resources of the state, entirely dedicated to breaking a group of 32 high schoolers and their teachers.
It's overkill.
Complete overkill. On one hand, it shows the devastating mechanical efficiency of an authoritarian crackdown, but on the other, it highlights the profound insecurity of the occupier.
Oh, do you mean?
They required an entire task force to deal with the threat posed by teenagers with flags and paint.
It is a terrifying disparity of power, and the machinery moves so brutally fast. By June 24th, 1941, the sentences are pronounced.
Less than 6 months later.
Just 3 days after that, on June 27, 1941, many of them are executed by shooting in Chiayo. The text cites a specific historical document for this, a report of the Odessa Military Tribunal, signed by Axelrod. I want to pause the analysis here for a moment.
Of course.
Because for the historical record, it is vital to actually speak the names of the individuals who were executed.
It is the least we can do to honor the historical record.
Dumitru Avramoglu, Victor Brodacci, Anatol Kotun, Onisik Kozama, Dumitru Dobanda, Antol Duca, Vicente Eprov, Herlebi Grastianu, Mihai Gradilagianu, Anto Gume, and Konstantin Sarbu.
That is essentially an entire generation of a town's youth, systematically erased by a bureaucratic order.
And for those who survived the executions, the fates detailed in the text were just as grim. The state handed out sentences ranging from 10 to 25 years.
A lifetime, basically.
Yeah. Vlad Alexev, Vsevolod Shobanu, and Dumitru Stichi disappeared into the Siberian Gulag system. Many others died in the brutal conditions of detention, like Ion Bakalu and Pavel Bogay.
Horrific.
But There are three specific individuals mentioned in the text that truly lay bare the unfeeling, mechanical cruelty of this tragedy.
The broader statistics tell us the scale of the event, but the specific stories reveal the true operational nature of the system they were fighting.
Right. First, we have Maria Manjaru. She was one of the teachers at the Vasalupu High School.
Okay.
She survived the initial sweep, but she was condemned to 10 years in the camps. And what was her specific crime? According to the text, she was sentenced simply for not denouncing them.
A 10-year sentence for silence. It perfectly illustrates how authoritarian systems maintain control.
They need you to be complicit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They demand not just your compliance, but your active vocal participation in the repression of your neighbors. The moment she chose not to turn her students in, she ceased to be a bystander and became an enemy of the state in the eyes of the law.
Then there is Yuriy Martinov. He was condemned to 25 years in the system. The text notes he was finally freed in 1954. He lost a quarter of a century of his life to a Siberian sentence.
Unimaginable.
But the final individual listed. It is the detail that absolutely stops you in your tracks. Oleg Frunze.
The ultimate tragic reality of this deep dive.
Oleg Frunze was only 13 years old.
13.
He was a child. And the state machinery we just described condemned him to 10 years.
You have to process what that means about the regime. A 13-year-old child was deemed such an existential threat to a global military empire that they required a decade of imprisonment to neutralize him.
It's just sickening.
It completely strips away any illusion of proportional justice. The state wasn't punishing a specific crime. It was attempting to surgically remove a defiant idea from the population, completely regardless of the age or vulnerability of the person holding that idea.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this today? We've traced an incredibly rapid, deeply traumatic 6-month arc.
A very dark 6 months.
We started with the sudden shock of a military occupation in June of 1940 and the bureaucratic renaming of a high school. We watched the visceral, almost immediate formation of a teenage resistance group in August.
Right.
We followed them from writing anonymous graffiti in the dark to executing a daring, deeply humiliating flag swap on the roof of the secret police headquarters on Christmas night.
The height of their defiance.
And finally, we witnessed the crushing, devastating retaliation of the state that ended in executions and decades of Siberian exile.
It is a profound historical microcosm. In just a few months, you see the entire cycle of cultural erasure, human defiance, and state repression play out in a single small town.
Our Wikipedia article actually references a specific source book used to back up these historical facts. It was published much later, in 1999, by authors Petru Bunăculea and Andrei Calcia. The title of their book, translated from Romanian, is Condemned to Immortality, O Sandi la Nemurirt.
That is a powerful title.
And sitting with that title, it captures the bitter, powerful irony of this entire narrative. The occupying state executed and exiled these teenagers to completely erase them from the map. But that very ultimate punishment is exactly what cemented their legacy forever in the historical record.
That is the ultimate, inescapable paradox of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
The harder a regime tries to crush a symbol, the brighter that symbol burns in the cultural memory of the people. Which leaves us with a fascinating and perhaps hopeful paradox to consider as we wrap up.
I'd love to hear it.
When an occupying force brings all its might to erase a local culture, changing a school's name, tearing down flags, rewriting the maps, how does the memory of a 13-year-old rebel ultimately manage to outlast the very empire that imprisoned him?